let me ask you this. So you guys have done Vayner Sports for a few years now. You mentioned Vayner Media. Like you've been in this game over a decade now. Take the Vayner Sports line and what it was in its infancy. And if you were to fast forward to 2020, what you thought 2020 would be like, independent of COVID and all this stuff, but as it relates to your brand and your business, what is it now versus what you maybe thought it would be at this point?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot has changed over the last 3.5, 4 years in regards to, when Vayner Sports first started, it was shortly after I left Vayner Media, and my original role and Gary's original role was as an investor. So our business partner, Brian, and former partner, Mook, they had a small boutique agency. And it honestly started off as an investment because, like I said, we love football and we thought it was interesting. And that intersection of sports and business has always been something I cared about. An easy way to kind of explain it is I was the kid in high school that played franchise mode when I played Madden 90% of the time, and 10% of the time I actually played the game. I was the kid in high school that obsessed over mock drafts. I was just really interested in how teams were built and contracts were done in the business of sports in addition to the actual game. And so started off as an investor, was passive at first, but the more and more I got to know the business, the more and more interested I got into it. And having left Vayner Media, I was looking for the second act of my career. So I decided to take the plunge, and we bought a majority of what was called Symmetry at the time and rebranded to Vayner Sports, our namesake. And, it started off as less than a handful of clients. We're now up to 35 plus active NFL players, and it's grown at a nice rate. We've had some draft picks go high. We've done some big second contracts. We have a lot of players that are trending towards those big contracts now, which is fun. Our first draft class is going into their contract year, so to speak. And then our second draft class, where we had 8 players, 7 of which that were on active rosters last year, they're going into their third year. So it's fun seeing that development and that growth. It's hard. It kind of, even though it's obviously been 3.5, 4 years, it's gone by fast. And, the other aspect that I'm excited about with 2020 that's very different than 2017 is we were very mindful those first 3 years of just staying in football and making sure we did football really right before we branched out. I think given my brother's personal brand and the brand equity of the Vayner last name, we're fortunate in the sense that we have somebody reaching out. We have numerous people every week saying, hey, have you thought about soccer? Have you thought about baseball, basketball, esports, boxing, cricket, whatever? And we've been really intentional and mindful of sticking to football for those first 3 years. But I think 2020, by the end of it, you'll see us expand into another sport or two. So I'm excited about that. And that's obviously a big development from just being a football agency.
Look, I've never been a pro athlete. I'm not on pace to ever be a pro athlete. I cover it, I'm around it, and I've always imagined most people's idea of what a sports agent is comes from like a movie like Jerry Maguire or something like this.
Right.
Everyone knows football. Hardly anyone knows the insides of your business. But I've always thought when I've seen you guys and I've followed your story for a little while now, if I'm a pro athlete or a prospective pro athlete, I got a bunch of folks who know how to negotiate a contract out there. I could sign with a number of them. Tell me if I'm way off base here. If I'm looking at you guys, you know how to do that, but you also have a background in investment. You have a background in marketing. Those are obviously things that I want 40 years down the road. Like, I got to imagine that's given you guys a pretty sizable edge in the market, has it not?
Yeah, I think it's obviously our differentiator. It's very much our belief in what we sell, and we don't want to just talk the talk. We want to walk the walk. And what's kind of fun is this actually works out pretty well. So this is my little home office. 2 of the guys in the background here, Derek Morgan over this shoulder and Josh Jackson over that shoulder. Both of those guys at different stages of their career came to that same conclusion and really represent what we're trying to do. So Derek, we were actually Derek's third and final agency for his playing career. We represented Derek for the last 2 years of his playing career, and he's now happily retired and very successful in various other ventures. And so, Derek had experience with 2 different agencies prior to us, and those 2 agencies were actually different from one another in terms of size and scale. And I kind of like to say that it ended up being Goldilocks and the 3 Bears type thing, where his first agency was too big, his next agency was too small, and we were the just right. And the just right also came from the fact that we also had this investment background, this advertising background, this marketing and PR and branding background. And so Derek's a great example where we worked with him for the last 2 years of his career and continue to work with him. I got off the phone with him an hour and a half ago, for example, right? And so I think a lot of agents and agencies in this business, the second that that player is no longer commissionable, they kind of just drop them and say, hey, I'm just an agent. What else can I do for you? But with Derek, I think I probably talk to Derek more now than I did when he played because, especially in the season, he was so locked in on football and put everything he had in football. He didn't have time to talk about real estate or investments or business or branding. And so that's a good example. And then Josh signed with us coming out of University of Iowa. He ended up going top 50 in that draft. He's going to his third season now. And I think a big reason why Josh gravitated towards us is because he does have interests that go beyond football. And he did see that there are other agents and agencies, but at the end of the day, it's a bit commoditized. There's a lot of capable men and women that can negotiate and help you through your pre-draft process. There's not a lot of people that can guide you off the field and post-career like I do and our team does.
In my world, I'm sitting here talking college football every day. We do a lot with high school recruiting, and it seems like about 25% of our industry is excited about name, image, and likeness and the continuing evolving nature of that entire story. And it seems like 50% are kind of leery, 25% don't know what to expect. In your world, you know that the NCAA legislation is about to be overturned. Name, image, and likeness. We're going to be able to do things with a high school prospective athlete and a college athlete we've never been able to do before. Open-ended here. What does that mean for you?
You said 25% of excited. You can put me in the 1% of the 1% of that 25% of the most excited. I think it's massive for us. And now I need the NCAA to provide me clear guidance on what I can and can't do. For example, it's very possible the NCAA decides that certified contract advisors cannot consult, college student athletes, right? Or high school student athletes. And if that's the case, I'll be bummed out because I can't have the direct impact that I would love to have. But somebody somewhere in my ecosystem can, right? We just have enough between Gary and I and the Vayner ecosystem. We just have enough people around. And so first and foremost, this is the right thing to do. These kids have missed out on the opportunity to monetize. And why is a college institution to say what they can and can't do, right? And I've always thought it was a double standard. There's musicians on every college campus that are making money streaming their songs on YouTube and Spotify and et cetera. Why aren't they being regulated? Why are they allowed to make money, but a football player can't, right? So it's always been this crazy double standard, and it's always been unfair. And I look back at, let's use Dunk City, for example, Florida Gulf Coast and the magical run they had in the NCAA tournament. That starting five, and I think the sixth man as well, those six kids all could have easily cleared six figures in endorsements in that period of time. And all six of those kids got zero. And, some of them had some pretty good careers in Europe, but none of those six kids made it to the NBA. And so the fact that the NCAA and Florida Gulf Coast prevented these kids from striking while the iron was hot is incredibly unfair because the university benefited, the NCAA benefited, right? Enrollment at Florida Gulf Coast from out of state exploded after Dunk City, right? Tournament ratings for Dunk City's Sweet 16 game was through the roof. The NCAA benefited. I'm assuming TNT or whatever TBS, that network, Turner benefited. But the players didn't. The ones that are actually doing it didn't. The head coach, by the way, he got a huge job at USC right afterwards, right? So everybody directly benefited except the players themselves, and that's broken in my opinion. So I'm excited about it.
Here's the way that I look at it, maybe from a different angle. Like you're talking right now about how much the athlete's going to benefit, and that's true. A lot of the sentiment out here that I think is incorrect, to be honest with you, is at the expense of the very few major programs benefiting from this, all the others are going to be left in the dust. And I'll tell you why I don't believe that. And you can tell me what your thoughts are on this. I don't believe that because everyone's thinking about how much can a university and boosters associated with afford to pay players. But here's what I think about. I think about all the mid-tier brands out there and the companies that really would love to advertise Saturday afternoon on CBS, but they're not Dr. Pepper and they're not Ford, so they can't afford those spots. All of a sudden, this gives hundreds of brands a unique window now into a sport that they wanted to be involved with. And to be honest with you, as much as Alabama and Ohio State may benefit from this, like if I'm Arizona State, if I'm Arkansas, if I'm Kentucky, why would I not be excited about this too?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And then I think the other thing too is the local side of things, right? There's schools and areas that don't have pro teams where the local team is everything, and that matters, right? And so there's local businesses too, in addition to the regional and mid-tier brands. The other thing I want to say too, to address the first portion of your point, anybody that doesn't think these players are being paid already by boosters and schools and things like that are delusional anyway. So keep that in mind as you think through this.
AJ, I got to tell you,
Right?
I've never ever in my entire life heard anything along those. Hold on, let me wipe the smile off my. Yeah, I've not heard any of that. Absolutely not.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like, listen, I don't advocate for it, although I personally don't see anything wrong with a student athlete making money based on their talent the same way every other professional in the world gets to when they're 18 and plus, right? But that exists, and you're just not, and everybody knows it, and people pretend not to, or they're delusional. It's one of the two.
Let me get you out of here on this kind of an overarching question, just about VaynerMedia in general. You guys are very
Yeah.
great at capturing everything that happens. And that's
Mm.
not by accident, man. Like that's, to me and to an outsider, it would be like drinking water through a fire hose to try and keep all the irons in the fire that you guys have. But it's not been an overnight process. But just talk me
Right.
through like what the day-to-day is like for you, your brother, like what the entire
Yeah.
operation looks like, and how often do you do an entire overarching inventory on everything that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll first say that my brother, his plate is even crazier than mine. And that's something that part of why I left VaynerMedia and VaynerX 4 years ago was based on my appetite for that. Like, I'm somebody that has very broad shoulders, and a massive strength of mine is the ability to juggle 30 things at once. I didn't want to juggle 1,000 things at once. And my brother juggles 1,000 things at once. So for him, it's primarily centered around great infrastructure. I mean, Gary has 3 assistants. He has a brand director. Like, it's infrastructure. He's somebody that is talented enough and successful enough where he's created enough top line revenue and opportunity to afford massive infrastructure. I think there's like 25 people that work directly for my brother, directly, right? And so for me, I have an assistant, which is great infrastructure, but it's obviously not that infrastructure. But I'm also not balancing as much as he is. So for me, it's practice. Like you said, it's not overnight. I'm way better at juggling a lot of things at once right now than I was 10, 11 years ago when I first got into business. So practice is a lot of it. Self-awareness is key. Stress management is massive. That's a big practice that I've had. I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed and stressed when you're juggling a lot. I'm a big advocate, and I rely quite a bit on good software. I try to digitize a lot of this stuff. So just finding the right software. So for example, we're investors in a company called Superhuman. It's an email application that I think is far and away better than things like Gmail or Microsoft Outlook, for example. So I credit Superhuman for saving me 10 to 15 minutes a day through automation and things like that. My note-taking application, my to-do list. So I am somebody who is heavily reliant on software, understanding how to utilize the resources that you have, right? So it's one thing to have an assistant. It's another thing to use your assistant well. And then as far as taking the inventory, I definitely try to take a step back and look 30,000 feet at everything that's going on. I don't necessarily structure it like once a quarter. It's a little bit more living and breathing, and I do it probably more frequently at lesser of a scale, just to kind of gut check to make sure I feel good about the general direction that the boat is sailing.
AJ Vaynerchuk, CEO, Vayner Sports. Brother, this has been really informative, really fun. I sincerely appreciate you taking some time with us.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for having me, man. A big fan of what you guys do, and I appreciate it.